Coming up, it was the most anticipated album of its time. This legendary band hadn't released a new album in 6.5 years, an eternity in rock and roll. It would actually be the second record released by the band since they parted ways with their lead singer. It's a pretty bad divorce. And it was put out when the musical landscape had completely changed. The former singer, who'd released a solo album just a little bit before this, he ripped the songs apart. He criticized the fact that the guitarist's girlfriend at the time had co-written the first single. Coming up, a songwriter who helped with that mesmerizing first single tells us the story, and we find out if this band could keep up with the changes in music and who came out on top, the former singer or the band. It's coming up. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you learn more from a 3-minute record than you ever learned in school, you're going to dig this nostalgic channel of music, stories straight from the legends. Make sure that you subscribe right now and the big red button, click the bell so you never miss out on any of our videos. Take a look at our Patreon as well. That helps us keep the channel alive. So let's not beat around the bush here. Every Pink Floyd fan knows and remembers that 6.5-year wait of absolute pain and anguish for their new studio album to drop in the 90s. 1987 to 1994. It seemed like an eternity to wait for the Division Bell. Written mostly by singer-guitarist David Gilmour and keyboardist Richard Wright, with contributions from Gilmour's then fiancée and now wife, novelist Polly Samson, and Nick Laird-Clowes of the Dream Academy. As well as experimental music composer Anthony Moore of Slap Happy. I have to say, it was well worth the wait. Produced by longtime Floyd collaborator Bob Ezrin, and of course Gilmour, as well as engineer Andy Jackson and saxophonist Dick Perry. It all started in January of 1993 when Gilmour, drummer Nick Mason, and keyboardist Richard Wright began experimenting with new material at Britannia Row Studios. Guy Pratt, who had been brought in during the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour, he came in and had a profound influence on the mood of the new music. They'd just gotten past the legal issues that plagued them during the making of their 87 album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason. David Gilmour was relieved, and from this he was more apt to create. They moved the sessions a few times during the production of the Division Bell, including David Gilmour's Houseboat and the Studio Astoria. They were creating a lot of music at this point, a lot of ideas coming out. Some estimate between 60 and 70 pieces of music. And then as they progressed, it turned into about 27 as they got rid of some of the songs and they merged some other ideas together. In the end, they transformed what they had into 11 tracks, and the band all voted on what they wanted on the final track list. As I said, David Gilmour's fiancée at the time, Polly Samson, she contributed lyrically on many of the songs, including the singles Take It Back and High Hopes. Great songs. She could take it back. The grass was greener. Now, this frustrated some, including producer Bob Ezrin, although later admitted that Polly had inspired Gilmour and that she pulled the album together, helping, Gilmour, who'd just gone through a divorce and he was battling some demons in the form of substance abuse. So in the end, she made a huge contribution. The Division Bell was a thematic album with ideas surrounding communication and, talking to solve problems. Interesting. Taking its title from the Division Bells it rung to summon MPs or members of the House of Lords to vote in the UK Parliament, the idea was suggested at the last moment in the absence of a good alternative. It was suggested by Gilmour's friend, sci-fi writer Douglas Adams. The album was definitely a deep personal exploration into Gilmour's psyche, though he has said that he prefers to let the listener draw their own meaning from these songs. There are so many poignant moments of just elegance and dignity throughout this record. You have to remember, this was a short time after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, with the fall of the Berlin Wall. That exhilaration is very apparent on the track A Great Day for Freedom. On the day the wall came down, they threw... This is a really great album. High Hopes, It's about Gilmour's youth in Cambridge and leaving his hometown behind. Incredibly written from his perspective.
It was on the other side.
Also references Syd Barrett. In fact, the final couplet from the song, The Endless River, Forever and Ever, it's a tip of the hat to a line from their second single, See Emily Play from '67, Float on a River Forever and Ever. It would later inspire the name of their final studio album, The Endless River, from 2014. You know, I would love to break this album down. It's one of my favorite Floyd albums just because of the time that it came out. The focus of this show today is on my favorite song from the album, one of my favorite Pink Floyd songs ever, the very first single, Take It Back. Let me just tell you about this. I distinctly remember sloughing school and, driving to the Pine Ridge Mall in Pocatello, Idaho with my friend in the waning days of March of '94 to get my hands on the Division Bell. I wanted to get it the moment they pulled up the gate at Musicland. I remember taking that CD, and I used to do this thing where I could rip it from the seam, pull it off, take the thing off to get the sticker off, put it in my car, and listen to it. I was just exhilarated. I listened to it with incomparable joy, the glee of a child on Christmas morning opening their presents. It just was amazing. I loved it. And so did everybody else. It went to #1 in 21 countries, sold 7 million copies. One person who didn't like it was former singer Roger Waters, of course. He said in an interview with Mojo, and I quote, "With all due respect to the people who went out and bought those records," meaning me and you, "they're just rubbish, particularly the Division Bell. It's just nonsense from beginning to end. A Momentary Lapse of Reason had a couple of really nice tunes on it that, had I still been in the band, those chord sequences and melodies would have made it onto a record that I was involved in." Let me pause for a moment in this quote. That's not arrogant at all. Then he says, "But conceptually and lyrically, it's just rubbish. Partly because it's not true. It's like, let's try and write songs that sound as if they're Pink Floyd and make records that sound like Pink Floyd records." End of quote. I love Roger Waters' music, but man, sometimes that guy is way off. Then he also made some cutting remarks on 3 or 4 occasions that I've read in interviews with Roger Waters about Polly Samson, David Gilmour's girlfriend / fiance at the time, now his wife, writing on some of the tracks, which I thought was very unprofessional. Not cool to go after somebody's wife. Thing is, Pink Floyd with Gilmour at the helm, along with Nick Mason and Rick Wright, they outsold Roger Waters every single time. Amused to Death, Roger's 3rd solo album, probably his best, made it as high as #21 on the US album charts, but it failed to sell even 500,000 copies. Now, beyond just the numbers, I am more moved by the Division Bell, though Amused to Death is, like I said, is his best solo album. Both are good records, but for me, High Hopes and Take It Back are just more memorable from a song standpoint. But the records are different enough that it's actually very difficult to compare. So I like both records, but I don't listen to Amused to Death very often, maybe once every couple of years. I listen to 4 or 5 of the songs off the Division Bell quite a bit.
It sounds like the waves on the sea.
I have to say that sometimes we listen to a song numerous times and it doesn't quite connect with us until a lot later. It's how Pet Sounds was for me. It's my favorite album ever. But it took a second for me to really appreciate its magnitude. That's how Take It Back was for me. So fast forward to the late summer of the following year. I'd graduated from high school. I just spent the summer working construction in Washington State, to put away money for my future. Remember, I'd worked 12-hour days for like 6 days a week for about 4 months, and I was about to go home for a few weeks before I would actually leave my home and the small town that I'd grown up in for good to go out into the world. I was anxious to get home, and I was given the opportunity to get home or go home about a week earlier than I had anticipated, as the crew who I came up with, they were going to stay a little bit longer. But I remember I was asked by a coworker of mine if I would drive his grandmother in her old Cadillac, the 9-hour drive back to Idaho from Washington. I guess her eyesight was fading. Now, she only lived like 15, 20 minutes away from my parents, so I would just drop her off, and then a friend would meet me and take me to my home. So I drove the whole way. I'll never forget it. She actually snored the whole way home. I have to say that there were a few moments where I thought I'd have like a National Lampoon's Vacation situation on my hands. I mean, she actually seemed like she was dead a couple of times. I was pretty worried.
Fine, don't be silly.
She's not fine, Clark. She's dead.
She never woke up the whole time, not even once. I remember I was just shaking her a little bit to make sure that she was still alive, because she'd, go to sleep and I wouldn't hear anything, and then she'd start snoring again like a bear. So her car didn't have a tape deck because it was really old. I was at the mercy of whatever radio stations would come in without static. And, they were playing some decent music. I was pretty bored. I was trying to keep myself alert. Naturally, my mind started to wander. And I started to realize that this was an important moment in my life. High school was over. It was really the last summer of my youth. Within a few weeks, I would be moving into the first vestiges of adulthood. Just as that impact, that reality hit me, I heard a familiar song come on the radio. It was Pink Floyd, Take It Back. It was like I was hearing it for the first time, and it seemed absolutely crucial. It just invaded my entire soul. It was one of the hinge points in my life. I mean, I was at the crossroads of my fading youth, my first glimpse of adulthood. Fear and confusion were running through my veins. I started to ask those big questions in my mind. What was I going to do with the rest of my life? How was I going to get by? What would happen to the friendships and the deep relationships that I had that I would be leaving? What did the future hold for me? I mean, just as I felt these overwhelming questions start to overtake my entire being, I heard David Gilmour's poignant meanderings. We were spinning into darkness. The earth was on fire. And just as he said that, I could see flames on top of a mountain from miles away. There was actually this forest fire, this mountain fire. The mountain was on fire. He was describing not only my own personal feelings, but the landscape around me as I was driving. So I heard David Gilmour's hypnotic guitar and his defiant vocal. I don't know how to say this without just saying it. It was one of those rare moments in life where you and the song you're listening to become one. Now, I know that technically this song is actually about Mother Earth and the eventual demise of our planet due to our own ignorance. Nick Laird-Clowes, who co-wrote the song and who we're actually going to hear from right now, he said in a quote with a magazine, he said, David Gilmour had this great idea about the earth in Greek mythology being a woman who could take the earth back anytime she wanted. Nature could take back everything that she has given. End of quote. And still some have said that the song has a double meaning. It's also a song about our relationships and how we take each other for granted. But, like many artists say, and even David Gilmour said it, the song means whatever each listener thinks it means. Leave it to personal interpretation. For me, it wasn't so much about the lyrics. It was more about the music and the feeling that it elicited within me. I was saying goodbye to my innocence, to my youth. I had this amazing realization that I could never go back. And then David Gilmour saying, now I've seen the warnings screaming from all sides. It's easy to ignore them, and God knows I've tried. All of this temptation, it turned my faith to lies until I couldn't see the danger or hear the rising tide. For me, at that moment, I was seeing the warnings all around me that the future was unsure. It was really scary, no matter how hard I tried. It's like Thomas Wolfe, who once said, you can't go home again. He wrote a book called You Can't Go Home Again. I knew that no matter how many times I tried to return to my youth, that innocence, that beautiful nostalgic place that I remembered from my past, it would never be quite the same. I could never go home again. I'll never forget the perfect duality of the song and the life experience. And ever since that, every time I hear this song, it takes me back to that moment when I was literally at the crossroads of my young life. So grateful for David Gilmour and Pink Floyd for that. So I was fortunate, like I said, to speak with singer-songwriter Nick Laird-Clowes, who actually co-wrote Take It Back, also Pulls Apart with David Gilmour and Polly Samson. He told me about the experience as well as David Gilmour as his mentor. As many of you know, Gilmour produced Nick's beautiful 1985 hit with the Dream Academy, Life in a Northern Town. Just a spectacular song.
Life in a northern town.
So up next, I'm going to share Nick's experience with David. As we go into this interview, do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. Right now, if you go to zenni.com or our link below, you can get hundreds of pairs of glasses that start at just $6.95. That's it, under $7. You can choose the style, the color, and the shape. Click on our link below, and also make sure to look at their amazing add-on features like Blue Blocks. Here's the story.
So after the Dream Academy split up, I went traveling to the East, and then I got asked by Pat Leonard and Richard Page to come and work with them. They were on Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers wanted me to write with them on a project called Third Matinee. I worked for a couple of months on that, probably 3 months. And then I came back to London. And when I came back to London, David Gilmour had started working on the second album that without Roger that he was, and he said, look, I'm in the middle of this thing. Can I play you some of the things I've been doing? Now, I'd been sitting in a studio with Pat Leonard and Richard Page writing songs. So I was completely focused on, so I came in and my chops were good. Again, I said, yeah, that's good, but this bit's boring. Well, that's right. Are those your finished vocals or what? Anyway, he said, why don't you come in and produce my vocals? That's how it started.
Life devalues day by day. This friend.
He said, look, the engineer, no one can tell me that I have to go in and hear if they're right. You know, because we've been in the studio so much, you know if they're right. So come in. So I started working on that. Then he was working with Polly Samson on the songs. And then they'd say, well, why don't you come over and we'll play you some of the new songs that we've got and that aren't written yet. And I'd come in and I'd listen and I said, let's take it back. I said, I love this song. I wasn't called Take It Back. I said, I love this one. So now we're into about our second or third month, and he played me Poles Apart, and I said, I love that.
Did you see?
He said, I've got no lyrics, and they both said, we're not sure where this is going. And I said, hey, tell me about your relationship with Syd Barrett. We know about Roger's relationship. He was your friend. You went camping together when he was 16. And he said, well, I never thought he'd lose that light in his eyes. He said, hold on. I never thought he'd lose that light in his eyes. And then we were off.
And that you'd never lose the light in your eyes.
We worked for an hour or two, all three of us together. And then he said, congratulations. I think you've written your first song on a Pink Floyd album. He went down to his cellar and he bought up a bottle of very special wine, which was fantastic. He had this song about nature and Take It Back and, you know, a Gaia theory. And I just loved it. That was incredible. And they hadn't got everything right and we worked on it together, but it wasn't quite right. And finally, it was the last song on the album. It was the last song for the album. And I drove back unsteadily home and I pulled the car over to the side of the road and I just got a flow on those last four lines on the album, on the song. And got home, woke up the next morning, thought, now I've got to sell them on the 4 lines because they're great. They're perfect. But are they going to think they are? And I said, I've got to come and see you. And I went and I did the 4 lines and they both went, it's brilliant. So that was it. The song was done. So that's how it happened.
I knew it was about the earth, about Mother Earth.
Nature, what we're experiencing now. You know, I was just in the floods in Germany and the fires going on the West Coast. I mean, it's still going on.
Well, that was just so brilliant about David Gilmour. Is he's such an underappreciated vocalist too. He's just so incredible.
His style of singing is so fantastic. He sings with an English accent and he sings without much expression. And Syd Barrett did that too, but he has this wonderful English, comfortably numb. Fantastic. I never stop. And I always say to him, you're my favorite guitarist in the world, apart from Neil Young. And he really is. I mean, because he solos and he goes off into some incredible place and takes you into the stratosphere, but he'll always come back to the riff that matters when you need it.
You nailed it. That's exactly right. And what would you say is the most profound thing that you've learned or admired from David Gilmour, though, that you added to your repertoire for song composition?
Well, the thing I'd said before about following what you believe it should be to the detriment of you just have to stick to your guns and the record will fail as much as you fail to stick to your guns for your vision. That was one. And two, his use of echoes and delays, digital delay, don't. When you put that with reverb, you make the sound like as big as a cave, or that in itself is an art.
Encumbered forever by desire and ambition.
He taught me about that. And that's how you make the world of your music. Before I met him and learned those things, I couldn't get my records the way I wanted them to sound. And sound effects was the third major important thing. I loved sound effects. I wanted them to be part of the music concrete vibe, and Floyd knew about it. Well, he doesn't just put in this sound of a dog barking or a car going. He makes a sound world with 7 or 8 different bits, and that's lovingly crafted. I learned all my studio techniques from him.
Wasn't that amazing? Make sure to leave us a comment about Pink Floyd and the Division Bell album. What are your memories of this absolutely breathtaking composition? Do you remember that 6.5-year wait? What do you think is better? Pink Floyd, Division Bell, or Amused to Death by Roger Waters? Let us know below. If you like this content, we do invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community, our growing community. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.